Ohayou gozaimasu. Ohayou gozaimasu. Very happy to be here. Very happy to be in Fukuoka, very friendly city, which we're all discovering in the mornings and in the evenings when we aren't here. I'm happy to be at a polyglot conference gathering meeting in Asia because I've been at them in Europe and in North America, and it's quite exciting actually to come here and see people who have come from Indonesia, from Singapore, from Korea, from China to participate. And so you get a sense of this budding polyglot activity here in Asia. I sat having my Hakata ramen yesterday, and there was a group from Tokyo who have a polyglot group in Tokyo, and they speak different languages. And they have a condition. They don't accept people who only speak 2 languages. That doesn't qualify. You have to have 3 languages to join their group, which I thought was very interesting. You know, we talk about the word polyglot. I suspect that even today, a majority of native English speakers have never heard the word or they might have heard the word polyglot, they don't know what it means. And about, I guess, 2002, what's that, 17 years ago, I wrote a book on learning languages, which I called The Linguist, because the most common term in English for someone who speaks many languages or is good at languages is linguist. And I did some videos, and of course that caused a great kerfuffle on the internet because people who study linguistics said, you can't say you're a linguist, you know, you don't know linguistics. I even had one guy in Thailand who he was threatening to come and beat me up. But in fact, that's still the case today. But I'm beginning to come to the idea that maybe the term polyglot should be used. Because as I'm going to attempt to explain today, I think conditions for learning not just one more language, but a number of new languages have never been better. I just want to mention that I wrote a book, therefore, called The Linguist, which was translated into a number of languages. We published it in China as well. And since we are in Asia, I brought with me about 8 or 9 copies of the book. And at the end of my talk here, if you are interested, you can come up and first come, first serve to help yourself to a copy of the book. Now, there we go. Polyglots. Now, there have always obviously been polyglots. You know, if we look at a map of the languages in the Amazon or in Papua New Guinea, where people live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, there's lots of languages. Those people must be able to communicate with each other. So obviously there are polyglots there. In the ancient world, because I happen to be studying Persian, Arabic, and Turkish right now, so if I look at a map of the ancient world, the empires that were there 2,500 years ago, of course there were lots of languages, not just Greek and Persian and Arabic, but many other languages. And so there were polyglots. But it wasn't as if everybody living in a little village that never left the village was a polyglot. Those people who were maybe at the administrative level or scholars maybe were polyglots. Similarly in China, as China expanded from basically the Yellow River Valley where the Chinese culture began, and they expanded southward, they must have, in fact, they did encounter many other languages which no longer exist. But at some level, there was communication between people who spoke these languages and the people from the north, so there were polyglots at that time. And same was true in the West. Obviously, the Roman Empire expanded, languages were suppressed, new languages were created, the sort of springing from the Latin language, and there must have been polyglots at that time. If we go to more recent times, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, lots of languages, and of course, typically those languages would be German, Czech, Romanian, Hungarian, European languages. It wouldn't necessarily include, in fact, unlikely to include languages from outside that area. But there were some very famous polyglots. King Charles, if you've been to Prague, Charles Bridge, Charles was a polyglot. He spoke French, he spoke Czech, he spoke German, he spoke a number of different languages. I think Maria Theresa, the Emperor of Austria, spoke a number of languages, including Latin. She would address the Hungarians in Latin, for example. And there's a very famous polyglot, a woman called Kato Lom, and I will get back to her later on, but she learned to speak 16 languages, and she's also from that area. And it wasn't unusual in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, say a generation ago, to find people who spoke 5 languages, German, Czech, Hungarian, and so forth. at least people of a certain class. So the idea is that we've always had polyglots, but it seems to be more limited to government level, academic level, the sort of bourgeoisie, but perhaps not at the level of the average person. Or so it seems to me. I haven't done research on it. I'm not an academic. I'm not a historian. I just take a flying leap at different subjects to amuse myself. So, and in Asia the same. If you look at a map, there's so many different languages here in Asia. And this, of course, is not an accurate map, because countries like China, as is the case with so many modern countries, centralized countries, they have worked to suppress the local languages. That's true in France, it's true in Spain, we have problems there right now. It's been true everywhere. So actually, underneath this map of languages of Asia, there's many, many more languages. And so at some level, people were communicating, so polyglots existed. So, and of course, in the last few hundred years, we've seen the spread of, call them the colonial languages. So English, you know, Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic, Russian, these are languages that were spread by expanding empires. And I mean, it's even true of the Inca Empire, which spread Quechua from, I don't know, Ecuador down to Argentina. It has since receded because they were subsequently supplanted by the Spanish. But so there have always been lots of languages, therefore necessarily there were polyglots. So then why do I say that today is the best age, the golden age of polyglots? So I wanted to put this up here in front of you because I think it's so interesting. There has been this growth of call them the colonial languages, and in particular, and I don't use that in a pejorative sense, because there have been expanding countries, religions, empires since the beginning of time, and these have imposed their language or suppressed their language, and this has always been the case. So I don't think we need to assign particular blame to any particular country. This is what humans have been doing to each other for a long, long time. So here we have the British Council, and this gentleman, John Knag, or however he pronounces himself, he says, "The lack of qualified English language instructors presents one of the largest challenges to educators and citizens across the globe." And that's an unbelievable statement. The lack of qualified English instructors is one of the largest challenges to educators and citizens across the globe. Of course it isn't. Of course it isn't. We don't need, first of all, qualified instructors in order to learn English, if we're learning English. Second of all, implied here is that we have to learn English. We have to speak English. In fact, この会議は初めての多カ国語の話してる人たちの会議だから、なんで日本語で話しないのかと、けしからんじゃないかという人もいるかもしれないですよね。或者是呢，我们这是第一次我们在亚洲就是举行这样的这个会议，为什么不用亚洲的语言吗？为什么不用中文呢？ Ou peut-être, puisque le Canada c'est un pays bilingue, je devrais parler en français. But the problem is that we have so much diversity, to use a popular word. In order to be inclusive, to use another popular word, we end up with English because we don't have, you know, simultaneous translation for everyone. So English is a practical language. It serves a practical purpose. But as the president of this university said, in his opening remarks, people who speak English, they lose out because they don't have that same opportunity to access other cultures. People who have to learn English, at least they learn one other language. But I say, even if you learn English, big deal. Because English culture is such a small part of the total quantity, range of cultures that are there for us to discover. So that even if you are a Japanese speaker and you learn English, you haven't gotten very far. You haven't yet studied and accessed people from other cultures. So I personally believe that we need to get past this idea that we learn one language. If we're in Japan, we learn English. If we're in the English language school system in Canada, we learn French. You have to learn French, and just one. And of course, the net result is, I can speak from experience in Canada, after 10 years of French instruction in the English language school system, very few kids can speak French. It's not even like more or less, it's like very, very few. There was a study done in New Brunswick, which is the only officially bilingual province in Canada. because Quebec is French, official language is French. The rest of the other provinces are English. New Brunswick is bilingual, and they did a study of kids who had had French since grade 2, 30 minutes a day, and after 10 or 11 years, the percentage of kids who reached what they called intermediate level of oral proficiency was 0.66%. Now, I am quite confident that that 0.66% had a Francophone parent. So really, the school system wasted 10 or 11 years, okay? And maybe some of those kids would have been interested in another language. So, and what has happened since, I think, is that we don't need the accredited English teacher, school system, formal instruction, all this other stuff in order to learn language. And I'm going to point out the 2 reasons why I think that today is a golden age of language learning. First of all, because there is an increasing awareness that we learn languages through input. So the only thing we need is lots of input. And as I'm going to point out, we have better input, better quality, better variety input now than ever before. And we understand that accessing that input is going to enable us to learn languages. So I'm a strong believer in much of what Stephen Krashen says, usually so very elegantly. You learn by listening and reading. You can't learn by speaking. You have to speak. In order to be able to speak well, you have to speak a lot. But until you can understand what people are saying, you can't engage in meaningful conversations. And I also believe that we all learn the same way. I don't believe that there are visual learners and oral learners and kinetic learners. We all learn the same way. We have certain things that we like to do. Some people don't like to listen. Some people don't like to read. But if we do read and listen, we learn. And so when we don't go to speak, and we have to eventually speak a lot, we should speak first of all, when we feel like speaking. Some people are happy speaking earlier. Other people wait. Some people are in an environment where they have access to people who are speaking the language they are learning. Other people are not. Some people are more comfortable waiting. It should be the choice of the learner. Far too often in our language, traditional language instruction, pressure is placed on the learner to speak. Now, I taught you this, now use it. It doesn't work that way. So I also think we should wait until we have enough words. I prefer to wait. Some people may be happy speaking with few words, talking about the weather all the time. I prefer to wait until I have enough words to actually have a meaningful conversation and a good chance to understand what the other person is saying. And I use the services of italki, a sponsor here, and I'm happy to get on once I have, on our link count, 3,000 words. With 3,000 words, I have a chance of understanding what the person is saying, and we don't just talk about the weather. Is it raining in Vancouver? Yes, it's raining in Vancouver. So, and once we start speaking, whenever we start speaking, we should just, and I'll get into this later, speak with mistakes. Mistakes, forgetting, unable to find the word, those are all essential parts of language learning. And so we have to accept that if we're going to learn a language. And you can't learn grammar. There is a there is apparently a Sufi, which is a branch of Islam, and I know nothing about Islam, but Sufi saying which says, you can only learn what you already know, which sounds a little bit contradictory. But the point is that until you have had enough experience with the language, until you have heard the language, read the language, have a sense of the language is no longer strange, it's only then that the grammar explanations start to make sense. If you don't have that, then the explanation, it's like if you're looking for instructions here, how do I find the bus at Hakata Station? Well, you go down there, then you'll see the Starbucks, and you turn left, and then you turn right, and you turn left. It doesn't refer to anything that I know, so it's perfectly meaningless to me. So you have to begin by gaining some familiarity with the sounds, the words, the phrases. Then you become curious. You might look something up. You might ask your teacher. You start to notice more things. But you can't begin by learning grammar. You can't begin by learning the basics. You can't learn the basics till you already know them. So in language learning, your brain is your best friend. As Manfred Spitzer, whom I often quote, German neuroscientist, said, he said a lot of interesting things, but he said, first of all, we don't learn in the classroom, we learn in our brains. Second of all, the brain is a machine designed to learn. It will always learn. It can't do otherwise than learn. But we have to feed the brain sufficient stimulus, experience, and the brain will start to sort things out. So you have to trust your brain. And it's not because the teacher taught you the subjunctive today that you will be able to master the subjunctive. It may be that the subjunctive clicks for you today, and it may click 6 months later. And the brain learns, but it learns slowly, and it learns on its own terms. And therefore, we shouldn't get upset with ourselves when we forget things, and certainly the teacher shouldn't get upset if you forget things. The world of language learning has changed. The world of accessing input has changed, because 50 years ago when I was learning Chinese, this open reel tape recorder, that was my source of audio. And I sat in my room, sweat pouring down my face, listening to my Chinese stuff over and over and over again. I couldn't take it anywhere. This was even earlier than the ghetto blaster. This is a heavy machine. But that's what it was. And I used to go to the bookstores, because if any of you have studied Chinese, you'll know that, first of all, any language, looking a word up in a dictionary is a waste of time. If you actually have to look it up in the dictionary, the minute you close the dictionary, you have forgotten what it was you looked up. So that's not a solution. And so I would go to the bookstores and look for readers where they had glossaries for each lesson. And I spent a lot of time in the bookstores looking for readers of this kind that I could read. And then I had my open reel cassette, or at least tape recorder. So 40 years ago, we had the cassette recorder. And I remember listening to this show on Okidoku over and over and over again to learn Japanese. But of course, the trouble is the cassette recorder every so often would go, and then you were done. You could just throw it away, you know. So that wasn't so good. Oh, there we go. 20 years ago, when I was working on Swedish and German and Czech and Russian and others, we had CDs. And we even ended up with MP3 CDs. And then we ended up with mini disc players. And we ended up with MP3 players. So all of a sudden, the whole world of input just exploded for us. And now on the internet, we can find films, we can find Netflix movies. I'm learning Turkish. I can go to Netflix. There's a Turkish soap opera. By the way, did you know that in Turkey, everybody lives in a magnificent mansion, drives an expensive car? Did you realize that? I didn't know that about Turkey, but anyway. But I can get the subtitles, and I can import those into Link, and I can study the subtitles as lessons. And then I sit there with my wife in the evening, and we have the English subtitles on, and she's able to enjoy it, and I'm able to enjoy it. YouTube, there's countless. For those who like songs, you can import those and study them. Audiobooks have been a major source. E-books for me in learning so many different languages. You can get newspaper articles, and you can even look up grammar. So the range of things that are available to us is like never before. And that is why I feel that we are in the beginning of a golden age of polyglots. Okay, so polyglot. I said at the beginning that I've sort of moved away from the position that the word is linguist. I accept the fact that the word is polyglot. And when I wrote my book, I was really proud of myself, because in my career, initially as a diplomat and then as a forest industry executive, I had managed to learn 9 languages. And so I wrote a book about why and how I learned these 9 languages. And I thought, wow, Steve, 9 languages, that's pretty good. And of course, today, 15 years later, I'm up to 20. So that's a significant... I can't say that I speak them all well, but I have explored 20, okay? And so I'm beginning to feel that the whole approach, getting back to the sense of you're an English-speaking Canadian, you shall learn French, you are Japanese, you shall learn English. In fact, we should be exploring languages. Even if we learn them imperfectly, it doesn't matter. Because every time you learn a language, the people of that language come alive. All of a sudden, it's not that I have a profound understanding of Arabic culture. I don't. But Arabic people, they're no longer like caricatures. They are actually living people. You get a sense, a feeling, an affinity for the people of the language you are learning. So there's nothing wrong with exploring a language. And if you say, I speak language X, you don't have to perform. Like if someone comes up to me and says, oh, okay, speak language X, and I go, blah, blah, I can't. Doesn't matter. I'm exploring that language. I enjoy the language. I understand the language. I also think that for the longest time I said we should learn one language and focus on that language, because that's what I did for Chinese, for example. But I now feel, and I've now experienced this on a number of occasions, that when we're learning languages, there is this issue of your fitness, the fitness of the brain, the language learning capability, and the ability to speak another language. It's not simply a matter of how much time you spend on that language, but it's a matter of how language fit your brain is. And so we have cross-training in sports, and I think cross-training in language learning is very beneficial. I think young kids, you know, in the earliest years of school, when they essentially will do whatever we tell them to do, which isn't the case later on, they should be exposed to, let's say, 3 languages. And the focus should be on comprehension, so that their brains become more flexible, and so that they acquire this, you know, acceptance of ambiguity, acceptance of listening to stuff that you don't fully understand. Doesn't bother them. And so they develop that habit, and that's a very important condition of becoming a good language learner. We have, of course, as polyglots, this community of explorers, which we are here, and we are not judgmental of each other, which is one of the delights of coming here. Everybody's very supportive. So that then the goal becomes communication, connecting with people, not perfection. And I think in that sense, we can be polyglots without striving to be perfect in any language. And so the new learning paradigm as polyglots is higher tolerance for ambiguity, which means higher tolerance for errors. And our traditional instruction method is based on the idea you don't want to make a mistake. Because if you make a mistake, you know, if it's out of 10, now you got an 8, or you got a 6, or you got a 4, and all that does is throw up a lot of negative feelings about language learning. And part of that then, in my view, should be, and I didn't feel this way 5 years ago, we should be encouraging people to learn multiple languages even at the same time. And even if that means that we have an imperfect understanding of each one of those 3 languages. And so I get back to Catalan, my Hungarian lady of the previous century, and she has this secret formula, but not so secret, for the best, you know, results in language learning. Obviously, it's a function of time invested, but the more efficient the investment of that time, the better. So if I don't have to spend my time at the bookstores of Hong Kong looking for books for Chinese, if it's available at my fingertips immediately, the better, you know, more time I'm actually spending with the language, not searching for content. And this is something where I think the polyglot community and others should work to try and generate more learning content, in particular at the intermediate level, which would mean casual conversations which are then subsequently transcribed. This is the biggest lack right now. We have, everybody puts out a beginner book in language X, and then we can go to a podcast or, you know, Al Jazeera for Arabic. But there's no intermediate level. And here's where I think casual conversations subsequently transcribed, and if that were done on some kind of cooperative basis for all the languages that people are learning, that would be a tremendous contribution. Motivation, of course, is also a function of having interesting content. The more interesting the content, the more motivated you are. In the early stages, we are required to do beginner material, lots of repetition, but pretty soon we're tired of that, and we want to seek out interesting content. So we have more now than ever before, but I think we can work to create even more interesting, compelling content. And obviously, these 2 positive factors are over the denominator of inhibition. If you're afraid to speak, or if you're frustrated by the method of instruction, that's going to diminish the effectiveness of your language learning. But I think there is the essential formula of success in language learning, and creating a new world of more and more polyglots. Thank you.
At one point in your speech, you said that you wouldn't start speaking a language until you'd reached a certain amount of words. But isn't that a bit contradictory to what you later said with just start speaking?
Yeah, I said that you should start speaking when you want to. In my own personal case, I prefer to wait until I have 3,000 words. But I can appreciate that some people prefer to start earlier. It also depends on your circumstance. When I lived in Japan, most of my time was, in terms of learning, was spent listening and reading. However, from day one, because I see Japanese people around me, whatever limited amount of Japanese I have, I'm going to try and talk to them. However, I'm not going to set up a italki session with a tutor just to say, I beg your pardon all the time. So if I set up a formal session, because when I deal with a tutor online with italki, basically I just want to talk. I don't want, like if I get a tutor and say, okay, today I'm going to teach you, the colors. I say, no, you're not, because I'm not at all interested. So I just want to talk. So in order to talk, I need words, and I need to understand what the tutor is saying. So that's my preference. But if I'm in an environment, if I run across an unfortunate Iranian immigrant in Vancouver, I'm going to inflict my limited Persian on them, for sure.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much. I just loved everything you said. I was wondering, I spend my time professionally with language teachers, trying to improve the results of language teaching in school. Have you had conversations with school people? Do you think that things that you said could be applied to the teaching and learning of languages in school, so that schools understand something about increasing motivation and diminishing inhibition?
It's difficult for me to talk because I haven't been in the situation of teaching in a school. We have teachers who use Link and use it with their classroom. It's difficult because, motivation is the key thing. 5% of your students are going to be very motivated, and the rest are not particularly motivated. How do you overcome that? If I look at my own experience, when I was learning French at school, the teachers were teaching us grammar rules. We had drills and exercises. When I got to first-year university, it just so happened that I had a professor who managed to make French civilization culture very interesting for me. He did it. I don't know why he did it. He just did it. What he did, he just turned something on. So he's a magician. So teachers have to be, and it's difficult. You've got, 25 kids. They've all got a different trigger point. As I said, kids in Canada are forced to learn French, say maybe they'd rather learn something else. It's a very difficult question. If I were teaching a classroom, I think I would use more sort of input-based activities, and we would talk in the classroom. When I talk to my italki tutor will, I always ask for this, and they do it. They have excellent tutors in a number of languages. They will send me a report with, say, 10 or 15 of the words and phrases that I didn't use well or where I made mistakes, and they record them. I study that as a lesson. I have that as a record going back 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. I go back over it, but I'm motivated. So I don't know if you could motivate the kids to learn, maybe they wouldn't need the teacher anymore. So I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, so my question was earlier that you mentioned that you thought that everybody learned basically the same way. But I was curious if you thought that there was like a difference between the way that you learn your first foreign language versus learning subsequent foreign languages. Because in order to speak a language, in addition to having like knowledge of vocabulary and grammar and stuff, you also need to develop social skills to use that language. So do you think that developing those social skills in the first foreign language helps you learn the other languages more quickly?
Your question is that the learning of the first foreign language, not your own language, but first foreign language. Yeah, I think the brain, the way I see it, the brain is not specific to language learning. The brain deals with all kinds of, incoherent experiences that are happening and tries to sort it out and create some rules and patterns so that we can function, period. So it does that with language, it does that with everything. And that's true if it's our first language, second language, third language. The brain is more flexible when we're very young, and gradually it gets less flexible. The advantage of the first language you learn, foreign language, is first of all, you gain the confidence that you are able to convert yourself, transform yourself into a person who can speak another language fluently. Because until you do that, you don't think you can do it. So that's a major achievement. The first language, in many ways, is the most difficult because you're asking yourself to do something that you've never done before. So you don't really think at some level that you can do it. The other thing is, as when you have only one language, as I say, as an adult or a young adult or an older adult, so your brain is set up for that language, the sounds of that language, the structures of that language. When you learn a new language, you've now got two sets. So you're more flexible. Two sets of sounds, two sets of structures, and with each language, you are more and more open to new structures, new patterns. You don't resist them. I still remember when I was learning Chinese, and I had another Canadian learning with me, and when he heard that in Chinese to say, "Are you going?" they say, "Ni qu bu qu?" You go, not go. He said, "Is that ever stupid?" You know, yeah, it's a language. That's how they do it. How can you, so you have this level of resistance to something that is different from what exists in your own language, because all you know, all the brain knows is that one language. So each subsequent language makes you more flexible. And so I say this, I'm a better language learner today at age 74 than I was at age 20. Yeah. So I don't think the social skills come into it at all. It's more the brain getting used to new sounds, new structures, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Actually, you just touched on it now. I think I once heard you say that you learnt more languages after a certain age than before. So obviously you're living proof that age, makes no difference when you're learning languages. Would you still say that's obviously the case today, that the older you are, the better the language learner you become?
Absolutely. And there are other things too. You have experience, and I think getting back to this question of if you go back to the person learning their native language, as an adult, I have a lot of experience. I have a lot of words in my own language, maybe words in other languages. All of those things make me better at learning languages. And we know now that research shows that the plasticity of our brains remains. Perhaps it declines a little bit, but it doesn't decline a lot. It's like this discussion about, so I think everyone at some level would like to learn a language. And so people come out to, "Oh, Steve, my friend, Steve, you're so lucky that you can speak all these languages. I would love to learn Spanish. But, I was never good at languages, and you have a talent for languages, and I wasn't good at languages." But that's simply not true. It is true that there could be differences in the level of talent when it comes to learning languages. But it's a minor difference. Just because I'm not ever going to be as good a golfer as Tiger Woods doesn't mean that I shouldn't try to learn to play golf, to use an example. So similarly there, it's possible that at the age of 60, the brain is a little bit less nimble than at age 40 or 20. I don't think there's much difference. I wasn't very nimble at the age 20. So, no, I don't think age has much to do with it. Motivation, time, the Catalomp's formula, motivation and time divided by inhibition or frustration.
Maybe this is a strange question. I'm curious what your opinion is for people who are interested in learning multiple languages. Do you think there's any virtue in planning the languages you learn to be spread across multiple language families, so that your frame of reference going from that is quite wide, and you become accustomed to many different unique kind of languages? Or would you say it's better to kind of maybe work within a family and kind of branch out and maybe start some point in Europe and spread out like that, or anything like that?
I think language learning is a matter of motivation. So you can be motivated in different ways. After learning Japanese and Chinese, I thought, geez, I should learn Korean. It's probably going to be quite easy, low-hanging fruit. Turns out it's not so easy, but that's another question. And I started learning Arabic, and then in Vancouver there aren't many Arabic speakers, but there's a lot of Persian speakers. So I said, well, I've learned to some extent the writing system, so why don't I go for Farsi? It doesn't matter. What I do find, though, is that if you can geographically, culturally spread yourself out, you will have a richer experience. But that doesn't mean that I didn't, if I speak French, I want to learn Spanish, and speak Spanish, I want to learn Portuguese. You can do both. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule, but obviously the broader the range of cultures, the richer the experience.
Since you said at 75, you are a better language learner. I think I can say it for all of us. When we grow up, we want to be like you.
You've already added a year to my life. Sorry.
I'm interested in your career as a diplomat, which countries you were based in, and did you make it a mission to learn every language of the country you stayed in?
Okay, so I was a diplomat for 7 years. My first assignment was to learn Mandarin Chinese. In 1968, Canada was getting ready to recognize the People's Republic of China. They needed to train people up in Chinese. I immediately started taking Chinese lessons so that I could then go to them and say, look, I'm your man because I'm motivated to learn the language. And so why not? So they sent me. So I learned Chinese. And then when I went to Japan, I learned it on my own. And then I went to work for a major Canadian forest industry, forest products corporation. So, but wherever I was, I mean, it's not just as a diplomat. If I'm in the country, like my wife and I were going to visit Crete, I spent 6 months learning enough Greek so that I could converse when I'm in the country. I had to go to Romania. I learned up Romanian. To me, I don't like being in a country where I don't speak the language and can't read the language.
I have a more global question. So
yes.
I try to approach people in Japan. I've been taking Japanese for 10 days, and sometimes it looks like my level of Japanese is higher than their level of English, which is more like it's a question: is there anything we can do? Because we improve techniques, we learn languages quicker. There are a lot of technology possibilities now. But still the level of language knowledge at schools, I'm talking about Japan and the United States, is still pretty low. Is there somehow we can influence the situation as a polyglot community? Because otherwise it looks like there is some kind of disconnect. That's our world and the world around is totally different.
That's an excellent question. And I have often felt, for example, I'm involved with the Langue Fest in Montreal, we should do more to promote language learning amongst ordinary people and not get too hung up on sort of esoteric subjects. In terms of your level of Japanese versus the average Japanese person's level of English, I suspect they're simply shy, that in fact they have quite a bit of English, but they're reluctant to use it. I know you a little bit now from the other day. I wouldn't call you shy.
Yes. Hello, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah.
Your comments and many of the presentations have been directed towards cultivating an intermediate and conversational level. What advice or comments do you have on developing a truly literate and advanced level in a language, such as one might find in a university or in reading literature?
So I think, when we learn a language, I have said before, I think the best sort of Gordian knot measurement of your knowledge of a language is the number of words you know. And I am always driven in learning a language to acquire more and more words. If you want to read literature, you need lots of words. If you want to read history, you don't need, or nonfiction, you need fewer words. If you want to read the newspaper, you need even fewer words. I mean, it's just more of the same. Like when we learn a language, we start out on a very steep sort of curve where a language that we didn't know at all of a sudden we are able to say a few things, we understand a few things. Thereafter, it's a very long, slow climb. For one reason, because the frequency of words declines dramatically. So the most common 100 words, you're going to see them all the time, 500, 1,000, but it's like this, like it drops off very, very quickly, so that to acquire all of the words that you need in order to understand literature or even some nonfiction, it's just time. You have to do a lot of reading and listening. We developed Link because I was frustrated at having books at home in German and Spanish and stuff that always had words that I wanted to learn, and I looked them up and I'd forget them. And so I realized that it's just a lot of listening and reading, and I enjoy audiobook and ebook, combining the two, because wherever you can combine reading with audio, it sinks in better. I lived in France for 3 years. I was a student there. And I think my level of French improved when I started listening to French literature in audiobooks. So audiobooks affects your reading. It affects your ability to take you up to that next level. It still comes down to time, listening and reading and time. And hopefully with material of interest to you. That's the whole motivation part of it.
I'm a Chinese native speaker, and I listen and I follow your methods of listening and reading a lot in English for 2 hours a day. I found I made a lot of progress, but I'm still striving to go to C2 level. Do you have some suggestions, and do you have a language that you don't have to go abroad and you self-taught yourself to C2 level?
Well, first of all, you know, C1, C2, those are all very arbitrary attempts to evaluate people. I always look at what was I able to do before, what can I do now? You continue improving on a continuum. There isn't a language that I speak that I couldn't improve in. I could improve in all of them. As long as you enjoy what you're doing, if you enjoy your reading in English, and you obviously speak English very well, but you want to acquire more words, you want to enjoy novels, you want to do more stuff, just keep doing it and enjoying it without sort of looking over your shoulder. Am I C2 now? Am I C1? I have no idea what level I am in the different languages. I am aware that I'm better at some than at others. I enjoy them all. I know that if I spent more time on any one of them, I would only improve. That's all. So there's no specific. It's just more of the same. Enjoy the language, read more, listen more. That's it. And I also find at a certain level, it's interesting to read grammar in the target language. So when you already kind of know the grammar, but then to read it again in the target language, because it's still then language content. If you read it in English, you're no longer in the language. I don't like monolingual dictionaries at an early stage in the language. I look up a word and then got 5 more words that I don't understand. And the same with grammar. I don't want to struggle in Russian to read about Russian grammar. But now if I read about Russian grammar in Russian, I'm reading in Russian. And I'm learning things that I hadn't noticed. All of a sudden I noticed them. And I enjoy reading it in Russian. So those are some of the things you can do to continue to improve.
In your book, I think you mentioned that English was not actually your very first language.
Right.
And then you moved to Canada age
5.
You moved to Canada age 5 or 6, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually lost your first language. And later, you then studied that language.
Right.
I'm very curious to know, was the experience of relearning the language that had been your first language to age 5, did that feel any different to you? How did that feel to you? Was there any perceptible difference in relearning the lost language?
No question. So I lived in Sweden, was born in Sweden, lived there to the age of 5. Then we moved to Canada, and my parents said, we're in Canada, we speak English. We always spoke English at home. I forgot my Swedish. But I didn't really forget. Anything you learn is still there, somewhere. So I went to Sweden at the age of 16. I spent a summer there. Some of it came back. When I subsequently worked in Sweden, I went out and got audiobooks on Swedish and about Swedish history and stuff like that. So I worked at it quite deliberately. But no question that you're falling back into something that's there. And I think that's an important point when people say to me, how do you maintain your languages? Don't you worry about losing them? I never worry about it. I never worry about it because when you go back to the language, you will realize that you have slipped. You know, if I'm off my Arabic for 6 months because I've been doing Persian and Turkish, I go back to Arabic. I've forgotten a lot. But very quickly, you get back to where you were, and in fact, you improve. And there's a lot of research that shows that forgetting and relearning and forgetting and relearning is actually a very good way to learn. So that in the case of my Swedish, I was, again, falling back on something that was there somewhere. But I want to add one other thing. I was in Montreal. And so I asked an audience like this, I said, how many of you polyglots grew up in a family where they spoke more than one language? Very, very few. So it's certainly a positive condition, but it's not a necessary condition for becoming a polyglot.
Hi.
Hi.
I've been learning Japanese for about a year and have taken various classes, some of which I've enjoyed more than others. I like the kanji class I'm taking now. I didn't enjoy the super intensive 2 years in 10 weeks that I took over the summer, 9 hours a day. One of the things the teacher said is find what you enjoy. In French and Spanish, what I enjoy is reading novels, but I don't, I maybe understand 5 to 10% at most of the kanji that I see. So I don't really know kind of how to get to the point where I can do the things that I enjoy, because I feel like there's this sort of gap and it's hard for me to reach. So I wondered what suggestions you would have on how to bridge that gap.
This is a very common problem in languages, especially where the writing system is not your own. And it's very difficult to get from the sort of early beginning, early intermediate content up to a more demanding level. I think that's the biggest sort of gap in language learning content, is sort of the intermediate. It's for that long period as we're trying to work our way towards things that we would really like to be reading. There's nothing much you can do. You can search for material, just keep at it. Eventually you get there. I mean, I can remember in Czech and Russian, I was looking up every second word. I thought I'd never, ever get there, and you just stay with it. You have to believe you're going to get there, and you just keep going. There's no other, that's just all there is. No, I have no specific advice for you. You're dealing with a very common problem.
Okay, that's fine. 我们的老人，我们的 polyglots 差不多一样的想法。好。I think these older polyglots think the same. Yeah. 同じように考えますね、いろいろ意見として。Okay, let's hear it for Steve. Thank you very much.